Talk about a nightmare beyond all nightmares. In our big case series that we're going to be doing here episodically on Law for the People, the Kim.com case is a case of nightmares.
And I won't, it's not booked, people, but I've gotten to meet Kim.com on Twitter in these spaces. I think he's going to come on one day to talk about it. Robert, give us the 30,000 foot, because Kim.com, I remember back in the day, public enemy number one, fraudster, a liar, an online criminal, a pirate. And I knew nothing of nothing. I didn't feel strongly about it. I just remember that's the impression that has been left with me. And when I listened to Kim.com talking, first of all, I never knew he was German, living in New Zealand now, I think, from what I understand. He's a smart guy. I mean, he's a smart guy. And now that I know that the media and the government has demonized everyone who happens to turn out to be the good guy and canonized those who turn out to be the bad guys, Bill Gates, just, Bourla, just to name a couple, I now view everything differently. But give us the 30,000 foot overview, and then I'll see if we can clip this and get Kim.com to do a sidebar with us.
Well, it's a case that has broad consequences for the entire globe. So that's why people should pay attention to it beyond its example in the persecution of Kim.com. So Kim.com is a kid from a family that had an abusive father whose mother helped him escape. And like a lot of sort of nerds of his era of the 1990s, he found refuge in the internet. Now, he got a little creative, as he himself has admitted, with the internet and decided to try hacking a little bit here and there. Became a little bit famous for it, got a suspended sentence for a criminal charge for it. And but he wisely used it. He used that obstacle and turned it into an opportunity as a sort of McAfee-style business model of defending people against hacking. Built a successful business from that. He launched into several other businesses from there, ultimately leading to Mega Upload, which he found he had moved from Germany to Hong Kong at the time. And Mega Upload was the cloud before the cloud. It was the means to transfer files to anybody in the world to get access to any kind of documents beyond the walls of censorship a state may provide. It was very successful. He got married, had a bunch of kids, moved to New Zealand. New Zealand kind of invited him there. That there was concern that because he'd had a prior conviction for the hacking activities back in Germany, that he might not be able to get residency in New Zealand, but he did. And so now during the same time period, the movie industry was going absolutely berserk in the United States, claiming that they were losing all kinds of profits from piracy of their films over the Mega Upload and other related internet sites. This was after the music industry felt it was devastated by Napster and sued everybody into oblivion, including a bunch of grandmas who downloaded just a few songs. Now, there was always controversy about this because people who did an empirical economic assessment found that, in fact, sharing of pirated films does not reduce desirability or sales of those films, and that often it has a reverse effect, that it introduces films to people who otherwise wouldn't buy the film, who then become interested in the film, interested in other films made by the same director or on the same subject matter or made as a series or sequel series. And what happens is they go out and purchase those films. They go out and go to the Hollywood theaters. That a lot of the data refuted what Hollywood was claiming. But Hollywood then hired, after they'd hired Jack Valenti. If you want to hear some stories about Jack Valenti, go to America's Untold Stories with Mark Robert and Eric Hunley, who will be with us in our Rat Pack style tour as we do Viva Barnes Law around the country.
And if anybody doesn't know, Mark Robert is I won't even limit it only to entertainment. To entertainment, what Barnes is to law. And it's like,
oh, yeah. He has a great description of it, but of the difference between us. It involves women and numbers, I think, last I checked. But the great descriptions of Valenti. But after Valenti stepped down, Senator Chris Dodd, who was famous for, let's say, Me Too style parties in D.C., had stepped down from the United States Senate and become the lead representative of the movie industry. In that capacity, he started to overtly, openly threaten the Obama administration and said, if people he didn't say Kim.com's name, but it was clear who he was talking about, that if people like Kim.com were not criminally prosecuted and criminally punished, the movie industry would cut off all funding from the Democratic Party. He basically said this verbatim on CNN and other places. So this wasn't just what he was saying behind the scenes. He made it clear in front of everybody. The movie industry was extorting politicians to go after their economic adversaries by weaponizing the criminal justice process. What happened is Kim.com gets indicted. Kim, he previously had a German name. He changed it to Kim.com. The man's a brilliant marketer and has been throughout his life and career. Though he himself doesn't drink and doesn't actually engage in the wild parties that he throws for other people. Because of what he saw with his father with alcohol is why he doesn't touch a drink. But he's just a brilliant marketer. And all of a sudden he gets raided with a massive SWAT team raid, helicopters, the whole 9 yards.
In New Zealand.
In New Zealand, by the New Zealand police. Family's terrorized. Wife is terrorized. They make a bunch of false claims. They claim he was hiding in a safe room with a sawed-off shotgun. There was no gun. The room wasn't locked. None of that was ever true. They had lied to get search warrants, to get information. Because here's the thing. All he's being charged with is that his users, subscribers of Mega Upload, used it to share films without copyright licenses to do so. That's it. And even though federal law in the United States is supposed to be clear that internet service providers can't even be civilly sued for the conduct of their users, least of all be criminally prosecuted, there's the additional hurdle, which is in New Zealand, there is no copyright crimes. This has now been recognized and admitted by the New Zealand high courts in the context of Kim.com's cases, which have been everywhere and gone up and down the court system. But so basically, and instead what happened is the FBI coordinated with the New Zealand authorities. They lied to the New Zealand authorities, told them that basically Kim.com is this big gangster. He's a mobster. He's organized crime connected. He's connected to terrorism. He's connected to child porn. He probably has a stash of crazy guns and security guards. There'll probably be a shootout if anybody goes in there. So all these guys were jacked up to the nines, not knowing all of that was false. Mm-hmm. The FBI deliberately lied to the New Zealand authorities to induce a ridiculous raid for something that didn't violate New Zealand criminal law, and by my judgment, didn't violate United States criminal law based on a bogus sealed indictment they got because a grand jury in the United States will, in fact, indict a ham sandwich, as a federal judge once pointed out, if a prosecutor asked them to. So, but it turned out to be even worse. After the raid, it comes out that first the search warrants were illicitly issued and granted. But there's a second issue. The police are being very evasive in the hearings being conducted. And what that reveals is that, in fact, the Five Eyes Network was involved in Kim.com's case. In other words, they were illegally spying on Kim.com in New Zealand all the way through. Spying on his text, spying on his phone, spying on his emails.
None of this is remotely surprising now. Like, now that we've seen what the FBI has done within the last 5 years, what the NSA has done within the last 10 years, none of it's a surprise. And so despite all of the spying, I mean, what things of incriminating nature did they even find?
That was extraordinary. Instead, what they found was very little evidence. Now, here's the other thing that happened. So there's a legal seizure. They seize his cars. They seize his money. They seize his phone. They seize his computer. So you have a search warrant based on a crime that doesn't exist, based on lies told by the FBI. You have it executed in a manner that only supposed to seize evidence of criminality, and they seize everything, not just evidence of criminality. Third, a court in New Zealand finds it's illegal and violates their laws. And what does the New Zealand authorities do? They give it over to the FBI anyway, even though the FBI wasn't supposed to have access to it until its legality was determined. Then what does the FBI do with it? They go back before the New Zealand courts later and misrepresent what's done, using New Zealand court officials to do so. They deliberately mistranslate it. And this is a classic game the governments love to pull. They'll get somebody to translate something because some of the communications were in German. And so what they do is they hire a translator and they create bogus interpretations of what the translation is. And one of the giveaways will be they don't identify the translator. So you can never call them to cross-examine their actual translation. So they falsely mislead the New Zealand courts and the New Zealand public into thinking Kim.com said things he never said, with false translations put into the court. This is basically perjured false testimony that if I did it, they would put me in jail and never let me out.
Yeah, or if an FBI attorney had done it, they would give him a slap on the wrist and allow him back into the bar society a year later. Oh, sorry, it was a suspended retroactive penalty.
Exactly.
I'm talking about Klein Smith, by the way, guys.
Yep. And so first the courts find it's an illegal search, goes up to the New Zealand Supreme Court. A lot of political pressure is clearly being brought on that court publicly by the U.S. authorities. And all of a sudden the New Zealand High Court decides, oh, it's okay to do illegal surveillance. It's okay to do illegal searches. The New Zealand government retroactively changes the law to allow the surveillance to occur. The New Zealand Prime Minister misleads people to thinking he had no idea what was going on, because it appears behind the scenes that what was going on, but for which the government of both New Zealand and the U.S. continues, I believe, to hide, is that they deliberately gave Kim.com New Zealand residency with the intention of spying on him in New Zealand and arresting and seizing him in New Zealand. That they didn't want him in Hong Kong because they didn't think they could get away with the same illicit behavior. So they gave him even his residency under false pretenses that likely implicated the prime minister. Kim.com started a political party to try to raise the issues about it. The media just continued to attack Kim.com. So it wasn't as successful as he wanted it to be. But he brought together Glenn Greenwald, Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, educated the New Zealand populace that this was a very different topic and subject matter than they thought. I mean, the reality is the government just picked on the wrong guy. That they picked on a guy who wasn't willing to roll over and go gently into that good night. And even though it ended up costing him his marriage, because his wife, most people don't recover easily from the shock of an early morning raid with, AKs and other automatic weapons being pointed at your face for nothing more than what was purely legal under New Zealand criminal law. And as I can see, actually legal and protected under U.S. criminal law. And so basically he's had to continue to fight the case. So the New Zealand high courts have been unwilling to provide the legal protection that they should, because they get easily intimidated by the United States. So at first he couldn't be extradited, and the high courts say yes he can. Then it goes back up. First the search warrants are found to be clearly illegal, and then they reinstate them anyway. They say the surveillance is illegal, then they do nothing about it anyway. They let the fruit of the poisonous tree from the illegal surveillance, the illegal search warrants, the illegal searches to all be allowed in against them. They allow falsified, fraudulent evidence to be submitted to the court with bogus translations. But the high courts have said that he's entitled to one more round of challenges and have admitted dual criminality doesn't apply, which means there should be no extradition. The New Zealand courts, sadly, are so weak, so pitiful. I mean, I've consulted on these kind of cases around the globe, UK, Australia, New Zealand, other Caribbean countries. And I've always urged the local advocates to directly confront the political reality of what these courts are doing. Say, here's how America perceives you. They perceive you as their little pet dogs that they will kick and you will come back squealing, begging for more. That they see you as someone they can lie to and get rewarded for it. Not just not punished for it, rewarded for it. That they can violate your laws and you will do nothing about it. That you are a rubber stamp for the U.S. government. That's how the FBI, that's why the FBI lies to them. That's why the Justice Department lies to them. That's why prosecutors in those foreign countries on behalf of the FBI and Justice Department lie. They know they will suffer no consequence. They know that the judges themselves are too politically afraid. They lack the courage of convictions to enforce their own laws. Because here's what dual criminality is. In almost every extradition treaty, you're not allowed to extradite someone to another country unless your laws criminalize the same conduct. Mm-hmm. If you don't criminalize it, you can't send it. And the New Zealand courts have now admitted they do not criminalize copyright infringement. So calling it racketeering, calling it money laundering, calling it any fraud doesn't apply when the only fraud, the only money laundering, the only racketeering alleged is copyright infringement, and copyright infringement's not a crime. So the only question is, will the New Zealand courts ever have the courage to stand up to the wrongful conduct of the U.S. government in the context of the Kim.com prosecution?
Now, two of his partners struck a deal. Are they
And one they
testifying?
let out, so he's the only one left.
And does that have any negative impact? Is this like two of the co-conspirators turning against the remaining third because all that the government really wants is Kim.com? Does their deal have any negative impact on Kim.com, or are they just off scot-free?
Well, I'm sure they're putting pressure. So the deal is that they can only now be prosecuted under New Zealand criminal law. And again, the reality is that means they have to prove some form of fraud independent of and separate from copyright infringement, and they got zero evidence of this. I mean, here's the other evidence. What's startling, when they dug into the evidence, in fact, Mega Upload offered no extra benefits to people who were doing the pirating activity, which was the original allegation. This was a designed model to get pirating. No, it wasn't. They didn't make any additional revenue whatsoever. That was their goal. They would have done so, and they didn't. So the allegations against them were false from the inception. But he's the only one that's been able to stand the test of time. He believes, as he's publicly stated, that those other people will be under massive pressure to make up stories about him in order to facilitate the extradition of Kim.com. But he's refused. They offered him sweet plea deals. He's turned them down. They've been offered other negotiated outcomes. He's refused. He's made clear that he has done more. They picked on the wrong guy. It was a guy who was willing to fight back and use his resources to do so.
Well, let's throw in the Seth Rich angle in all of this, because the prosecution, or let's say the prosecution starts before Seth Rich. It's continuing to this day. Has it ramped up as a result of the allegations involving Seth Rich? And for those who don't know, Kim.com alleged that he had evidence or could prove or was contacted by Seth Rich, and that Seth Rich was the leaker of the DNC emails and it wasn't a Russian hack. Is there an argument that he made up those allegations as pressure to try to combat the lawfare, or the lawfare doubled down after that fact might have been alleged in order to punish him for getting that involved in U.S. politics?
He's been unwilling to go gently into that good night. And he's aligned himself with Glenn Greenwald, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, the belief in privacy, exposing illegal surveillance and illicit conduct, and made himself an open adversary of Hollywood. And that a lot of these pirated films were being shared in countries where those films were not allowed, right? I mean, and that his point is that, if you have a secure cloud mechanism, what it is you're past the censors. You're past the whether those censors are the state or private corporations, and that's how the law is really being weaponized currently. He was designing a system that would have given creators most of the profit from their own creations. That was a direct challenge to Hollywood and to the music industry. Mm-hmm. And so he has many powerful adversaries around the world. And rather than, just retreat, he has advocated for others who have exposed the misconduct and malfeasance of the surveillance state.
All right, it's fascinating. It makes you've made it make a little more sense, but it makes no sense why they would get involved in a decades-long battle to take this guy down for what is, at worst, video piracy. At worst, they calling it RICO racketeering and whatever just gives it a scarier name. It doesn't make sense. You've made it make a little more sense. I tend to think that the doubling down might have had something to do with what I now tend to think is probably more accurate information, that he had some information about Seth Rich, which the world has not yet been able to answer, but we'll see. Amazing.